I'm just going to take questions randomly, and don't be afraid, stand up and let me know, and we have mics around the room. So who wants to start us off, maybe just in terms of the questions? I think it's at table 13. That's wonderful, thank you. I saw one hand down there. There we are, there's a mic for you.
How's it going? Really powerful stuff from all the panellists, really inspiring, and I suppose to help us all kind of self-reflect on our own experience that we might not be able to think of in the same way. My question is to all the panellists. What would each of you like to see come out of the Assembly's recommendations on a personal level?
Okay, let's see. Carl, you're closest to me, so I'll ask you first.
Yeah, I suppose for me, I've been debating with my job around decriminalisation and legalisation. We've been kind of looking at that, and I'd be probably for decriminalisation. I'd be on the fence with legalisation. I've been looking at even the international literature of like where they prescribe diamorphine to drug addicts and stuff. But in regards to decriminalisation, I work with young people and who smoke weed and who could get caught with a bag of weed at 15 years of age and pick up a criminal record that could affect the whole life. It could affect
their jobs,
their travel, their education, you know. So I think that if there was a health-led approach where that young person could see to actually tackling why he has the weed, why he's taking it, that it doesn't need to be this way, you know. No one ever told me it doesn't have to be this way. My reality was my reality, and I thought everybody else's reality was the same as my reality. I've never seen the bigger picture. But for that instance of saving our youth, I don't think we should be criminalising them. I think we should be helping them.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. Fionn?
What I'd like to see this Citizens' Assembly come out with is something that is not only a standalone set of recommendations that you can kind of take to government, but a framework that you can build on. That looking
in what sense?
Well, what we've seen is that drugs is not just a criminal justice issue, and it's not just a health issue. It is something that affects everyone from the social level to the community level to the work level. What I'd like to see these recommendations come up with is a really secure framework that going forward, that this cross-section of society that has been entirely obliterated in terms of their rights or their representation doesn't pop up again. To see it from a health-led approach so that we can, like Carl has been saying before, to have this come from the person being able to treat somebody, being able to make sure that it's focused on the individual and that it's a tailored experience, because you can write a bill, you can write a law, and it's not going to cover everybody. There will be somebody in that outlying system. There has to be flexibility within it. That if somebody, say for instance it's a health-led approach, if that does come about, if somebody within the system starts to diverge from that health-led approach, they shouldn't just be hit with fly swatter and then told, well no, back in, we've given you your lane. We've seen before that the system does fail, like in the video earlier on. Whatever system you build, there will be people on the outliers, so it has to be able to grow, naturally so that it's a services-led growth. So if you're looking at, you know, like drug policy going on following the Citizens' Assembly and whatever those recommendations are and whatever the subsequent law changes are, that has to be able to be grown by people on the front line with lived experience of drug use, with like obviously support from family members and service providers. But what I would like to see is something active and dynamic grow, because you know you can bang about the criminal law book forever and ever and ever, and it doesn't stop murder, it doesn't stop any of the other of these horrible crimes. So criminalising and making it a criminal justice issue solely is not what it's going to work.
Is there a role for both?
I think that there is a role for both, because like we've seen that when people are involved with like polydrug use or things like that, you are by virtue of using drugs and buying drugs breaking the law. So the law will be involved in some way, shape or form. But what I'd like to see the criminal justice aspect of it shift away from the individual and say perhaps onto the, of the more grand scale importation, and have that criminal justice as an overarching structure that governs like everything in society. It's there as a distant shield. But when you're looking at something like addiction, you're in the absolute most vulnerable position that you can be in, and you're essentially in somebody's living room, the living room of their mind. So you don't want to be going in there with, you know, a nightstick and a whistle and a high-vis jacket. You really want to be going in there and sitting down and teasing out and coaxing out the problems. So I would like to see criminal justice as a distant barrier, as a faraway border to keep criminality and violence away from people using drugs. But on the more close-to-home aspect, I would much rather be treated by a doctor or a nurse than I would be treated by somebody who has the power to detain me indefinitely.
Gillian, I saw you nodding your head furiously during a lot of that. It is that sort of sense of the holistic, the wraparound, and the services for people who are struggling.
I think the way it's criminalised at the moment, I'll bring you back to my story as to the financial impact of it really on the government. That costs more, that decision costs more in the long term on the resources, on the system, and, you know, on the government. It was like, what, I think my rent was €1,600 a month. The government ended up paying like that a weekly to keep me in emergency accommodation, whereas if, you know, you decriminalise it then and you put the resources into a more health-led approach, which is meeting people where they're at, you know, kind of more mental, psychological, because it's all a trauma response, you know, and I'd be of the opinion that we're traumatising traumatised people in a lot of the decision making at the moment. Yeah.
And penalising them often through the criminal justice system. Shannon, just table 13, what would you like to see the Assembly to take away, or what recommendations would you like to see taking shape?
I'd say the lads kind of nearly broke it down for me as well, but I'd like to see that it's like to take away. I know I obviously everyone can't get away with, you know what I mean, what they're doing, but it's to break the cycle. And as well, I know we can't open up everyone's minds, but it's not to stop sweeping things under the carpet, pretending that none of this is happening. Like, it's happening everywhere. It's happening, and like people, as they like to say, like in the lower class communities and stuff, but it's not. It's happening with people that's working up high. It's happening with barristers, solicitors. It's happening with everybody. And just because the lower end scale of the people, they get the more. And if you're in the system already, or you're highlighted already, you're going to get more of a sentence as it is than to somebody that has money or that can bail you out and stuff. And it's just to be a little bit more open-minded, that people that went through addiction and did horrible things, even like myself, that I'd never picture myself ever doing today. Like, I broke a cycle for my children, that my children, I could hope so, that my children would never end up in jail or a treatment centre over the trauma that I put them through. So that's something that means something so much to me, that I don't want all, like, I can say only for, like, I don't want it, but for people to get a more understanding that no one's just out taking drugs and drinking and doing crimes just because they feel like it.
Okay. And you want that, maybe measures to break that intergenerational cycle of trauma?
It's trauma, mental health, being literally, like, labellised since you're a child. Having a label on you and you can never get rid of it, really.
Yeah. Okay, I'll take another question. I think we'll just go to table 4 here. Thank you. And there's a microphone there for you.
Thank you. My question is there any one thing that might have helped each one of you when things were most critical?
Absolutely, Gillian.
I suppose I've always had a voice. I've always been able to speak my voice, but no one heard what I had to say. You know, so I suppose if people met me where I was at and heard what I had to say, rather than judging or discriminating or, you know, stigmatising me for what I was doing, look at to why is Gillian doing this? What has, like, you know, how can we help Gillian? But that's not how this is approached. How it is, it's you know, there's a stigma around using drugs, and you carry that stigma, and unfortunately, you know, you go into a police station, you're stigmatised. You go for a job, it's stigmatised. Throughout my whole life, I've been stigmatised for it. And then, you know, generational. We can go into generational. Both my parents were people that used drugs. I became a person that used drugs. You know, a lot of the stuff that impacted me has impacted my children. Like, you know, they went into the care of the state. You know, there's one of them is still in the care of the state. So that's like the baton is being passed on, not through any, you know, want or will from myself, but it's just the way the structures are designed. You know, the system is designed to keep people that use drugs in the system. I have tried to get drug free. Would be my 4th time, and every other time I've failed because I can't reintegrate into society, because society isn't allowing me to. You know, I haven't been in trouble with the police in 5 years, but yeah, I got charged like in February for something that I done 5 years ago. I was brought in front of the justice system, and I was looking at being sentenced only for the guard took it upon himself to go and try and get the struck out. But that's a rare occasion, the guard doing that. You know, the majority of my experience through 3 decades of active drug use is, you know, it's discrimination, and you're being re-traumatised. You know, by going into a police station, it's traumatised, and having to strip search, it's traumatised, and, you know, going into emergency accommodation when you're not used to it, this is all traumatising. So what's happening is you're putting trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma, and then you're wondering why aren't people can't get out of this, because there's no gentle encouragement to do it. It's all like disenabling rather than enabling. You know, if you have a child and you're, you know, giving it a negative reinforcement on a daily basis, that child is going to believe there's something wrong with them. The systems are designed to be negative towards people that use drugs. There's no compassion, there's no love, there's no care. You know, yeah. So that would be my answer to that.
Carl, it's especially with things like dual diagnosis and all things, but often the needs of people who use drugs are so complex. But if you had one thing, what do you think would have made a huge difference to you when you were younger?
My voice to be heard. My voice to be heard.
For you, Carl?
I suppose for me, where it kind of changed for me is where I couldn't back myself. I couldn't back myself to change. Somebody else backed me. So when I seen somebody believing in me, I start to get that belief in myself. And I'm sitting here thinking like that, like all the interventions that could have possibly been done, I don't get resentful at that. It's kind of, I let it go. But I'm sitting here thinking, and I probably kicked myself I didn't say that. I had to take some level of responsibility myself for my addiction as well, because if I kept blaming everybody else, I probably would have never, like,
Could have heard of it?
yeah, you know, so like I had to, we have all the interventions that could have been done, but I had to like own some of it myself, you know. I couldn't, like, I had to stop blaming people, I had to stop blaming, and until I felt like that, if you get that, I don't know if you get that, but like it's like, I had to own some part of myself, you know.
Shannon, for you, again, it's a tough but a really kind of insightful question. If there was, looking back, if there was one thing, what did you need, or what could have made the difference for you?
And I'd say the first encounter, really, what could have made a difference to me was when I was put into care, and I was just shipped away from my family that wanted me, that fought hard, and Tussla wouldn't give me to them. And that broke away, that gave me more trauma and stuff. The guards put a thing on me when I was only 11 years of age that I wasn't even allowed in Waterford. And every time I'd run away, then they put me in lock-up units because I was running away from the homes and stuff. But it's like Gillian said, none of them actually asked me, what is going on? Why are you running away? Why are you here? Why are you... You know, and it's even like when I got a little bit older then, and I had Tussla involved with my children, I went from being like at the lower scale of having 1 or 2, 3, 4 charges to boom. And then they kept on saying, people kept on saying, like the mental health services, all loads of services kept on saying, like, you are in addiction, you are. But I never got asked for a urine once. Nobody ever asked me. They put it to me, but they never asked me, like, for a urine or, are you in addiction? They told me I was, but...
That recurrent theme of just not being heard, I think. Fionn, what about for you? What do you think?
So, for myself, having not really entered into, say, problematic drug use or stuff like that, but from what I can see from my own brother and my friends, and even for myself, when I did use it recreationally, if at any point when I was going through a really bad trauma when I was young, say when I was 15 after my brother passed away, if I had been given better access to mental health services, now I did have access to CAMHS, but I found CAMHS quite difficult for me to engage with because it's quite intense as a 15-year-old to be talking about, you know, life and death and how do you process death. For my brother, following his initial overdose in 2012, if at any point he had been entered into a holistic program, he was brought into an acute unit, which had been, you know, nicknamed, you know, the mental house of that wing of the hospital, which was the terminology used by everybody in there. And you had everybody you have people experiencing bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia, and then you also have someone like my brother who's coming out of a rather difficult period mentally. So if at any point a tailored system had been introduced to somebody, if somebody got to sit down with the counsellor who had the power to look at their file and go, well, okay, here's what you need. Here's the name of a psychiatrist. Here's the name of a psychologist. Here's a GP. Here is a social worker. Or here's somebody that you can go along with and that will actually teach you to live with this in your field. Like my brother was a chef. I'm a chef. Nearly all the men in my family are chefs, save for one. We all grew up as chefs around drug addiction, but we never had that opportunity early on to articulate our feelings, to articulate why we wanted to do it, and to articulate how it felt when other people did it around us. Were we doing it because we wanted to be a part of something? Were we doing it because we wanted to kind of feel something? These were things that I still don't know the answer to them now, to be honest, but hopefully with time that will come out. But I think that early on, teaching people to articulate how they feel and to let them know that you're good enough to ask what you want for yourself. You're good enough that what you want, you can get for yourself within reason. And that's what I think would really need, is for somebody to take the hand of a scared 15-year-old somewhere and to go, I'm listening to you. You're not going to be left behind. You're not going to jail. You're not going to spend months in a padded cell. We're going to take you somewhere where you can talk about your feelings, articulate what you want, and we're going to find out what you need. And if we can't get it for you, we're going to find out why we can't get it for you.
Absolutely, that is profound. The most important job of a moderator is to get people to the coffee break on time, and I am determined to do that. So I have time for one more question, and I'm going to take it from, is it table 12?
Does widespread recreational use make people with trauma more likely to get involved and become addicted?
So just repeat that for me. I think it was in respect of...
Does widespread recreational use, some of your panel have said there's widespread recreational use, does that make people with trauma more likely to get involved and become addicted because of accessibility?
I think maybe Carl, because you referenced the rave scene earlier and kind of the fun part of it, but that notion that, as we all know, there's a lot of kind of widespread use maybe of party drugs, of cannabis, which are often the stepping stones. I think the question from table 12 relates to if you've had trauma, are you then predisposed to that use becoming more problematic or ultimately dependent, do you think?
Yeah, I suppose with the drugs now are so easily attained, you know, like it's with even dual diagnosis, like it's what came first, the chicken or the egg, you know. Someone is introduced through a social aspect, then there's a line of cocaine, let's say, and all of a sudden that triggers that mental issue within that person. So I believe the answer is yes, that if the drugs are more widespread, they're more socially accepted these days, that they're, like, if you look, I've studied research in Ballymun, and it was only weed, that the normalisation of weed use within subcultures like Ballymun, and like unfortunately now we're moving from a phase where we've moved from the heroin addiction, we're moving from it, and we're moving into a new problematic stage with like cocaine. Like heroin sedated people. You know, a kind of Lord, now you're moving into cocaine. Heroin is an opioid. Cocaine is more of a nubber, which brings more like
aggression
behaviours, anger, fear.
And that's before we get to synthetic drugs, which we're actually going to hear about much more in our next panel, and about how that is affecting behaviours. We are 40 seconds over, but I am determined to get you for your coffee break, because that's important, and I want to give time to all of the rest of our speakers. But once again, to Shannon, Fionn, Gillian and Carl, thank you so much. And Paul, I'll just hand you back.